seated. Last Wednesday, we had our last Awana for the year, and we had 89 people here. It was a huge crowd, wonderful turnout. And one of the things that was interesting about it is that some of the kids were talking about at school that there was going to be a party at the church for the Awana thing. And we had a family that showed up that this was their first time they'd ever been in the building. And because their kid heard that there was a party at the church, and so they came. And so now they're signed up to come to Awana this fall when we started again. What you need to know is that when you give to this church, some of that money goes to Awana. You provide a doorway for people to come into our congregation. You provide a way for children to hear about Jesus. You make a difference in our world. I think oftentimes when you put your check in the offering plate, you don't really realize what it does besides pay the bills. When you pay the bills, oftentimes you change lives. We want you to know that. Genesis 38. This would be a good one if you have your Bibles to follow along, because we're going to look at the whole story of Genesis chapter 13. About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law, Tamar, is guilty of prostitution. And as a result, she is now pregnant." Judah said, "Bring her out and have her burned to death." As she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. "I am pregnant by the man who owns these," she said, and she added, "See if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are." Judah recognized them and said, "She is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah." And he did not sleep with her again. When we preach out of Genesis, that's a good thing to preach out of, because there's lots of stories there. And one of my preaching professors said that one of the advantages about preaching about books that people know is that everybody feels smarter, because we know the stories. And so you know about Adam and Eve, you know about Noah, you know about Abraham and Isaac and Jacob's wrestling and Jacob's ladder, and you know about Joseph and his coat of many colors. But when we come to chapter 38, we find ourselves going, what in the world is going on? What is this Judah and Tamar thing? It doesn't fit. It interrupts the Joseph narrative. It's a story that we find to be puzzling, if not disgusting. And so the first two questions we immediately ask ourselves is, what in the world is going on? Why is this story in the Bible at all? And why is it stuck here in this middle of this Joseph narrative that we just started last week? Well, the writer of Genesis, Moses, and then whoever helped do the editing process later, they were very, very clever in what they did with this Judah-Tamar story. And what they're trying to tell us is they're setting the stage, because Judah's going to go from a louse. He was the son, the brother, who betrayed Joseph and said that let's throw him into slavery. He's a loser, and yet, eventually in the Joseph story, we're going to find that he's the hero. He's the one who rescues the family, watches out for his youngest brother, Benjamin, and ends up becoming the leader of the entire tribe of the Jews, which is why the Jews are called Jews, after the tribe of Judah. And Genesis has an interest in telling us what's going to happen leading towards the Messiah. And it's going to be through the tribe of Judah that we're going to get King David is going to lead to Jesus. And so this is a very crucial part, is to telling us about a change that takes place in Judah. It's how he goes from being a louse to becoming a hero. And it's placed here strategically because the Joseph story starts in Canaan. The Judah-Tamar story is in Canaan, but it's going to make a segue towards Egypt, which is where the rest of the story of Joseph is going to take place. So let's begin looking at this story. Now I need to give you a reminder again. The stories in Genesis, although they are written for us, were not written to us. That's crucial in this story, because when we read about Judah and Tamar, all kinds of red flags start going off in our mind. We start thinking that this is some sort of immorality and disgusting and incest, and the story is not about that at all. And that's because we're reading it through our cultural lens, rather than first hearing it through the cultural lens of the ancient Hebrews. And so we need to hear this story anew, hear it again, as how the ancient Hebrews would have heard and understood this story. The story starts off first off by saying that Judah went down from his brothers. The story, historically, is right after Joseph had been betrayed by his brothers, by Judah. They go to their father Jacob and they lie to him, they deceive him by giving him the bloody coat of many colors and says, "Do you recognize this?" And so he's overcome with grief. And Judah now can't live with his brothers anymore, can't live with his father. He's either, so racked by guilt or depression or whatever. And so he goes down. And it's not just talking about a geographical change for him. There's a symbolism here of a moral change, of a spiritual change that is happening to Joseph as he goes down to live in a Canaanite village. And it's like a whole series of dominoes now that just seem to fall apart for Judah as his life is it just starts to go down the toilet here. He ends up betraying his brother Joseph, and then he deceives his father. He moves to this Canaanite village. His best friend is a guy by the name of Hiram, who is a Canaanite. He marries the daughter of Shua, a Canaanite girl, who gives him 3 boys, Onan, and Shelan. And then he arranges for his oldest son, to marry a Canaanite woman by the name of Tamar. Just one bad decision after another, after another, after another. A series of dominoes. Have you ever been in Judah? Have you ever found yourself making one decision that leads to another one, to another one, to another one, and everything just seems to be going down the toilet and you can't seem to be able to stop it? Do you know a Judah? Maybe you have a Judah in your family because they just knock over the dominoes and away they go, and you can't seem to figure out how to fix it, how to stop the destruction that is happening in their lives. This is Judah. His life is spinning out of control. A few years ago, there was a television show. I only watched a couple of episodes, but it was very addictive. Breaking Bad. Did you watch the show? Fascinating. Rough, but fascinating. It's about a mild-mannered high school chemistry teacher by the name of Walter White. He barely can make ends meet on his teacher's salary, and he doesn't think that life could get worse for him, but it does. His wife is pregnant. He doesn't know how he's going to be able to pay for the kid. He discovers that his teenage son has cerebral palsy, and then the last thing that happens to him is he's diagnosed with terminal cancer and he's dying. And he realizes that by having cancer, it's going to financially ruin his family. It's going to wreck everything. And so in the little bit of time left, he's trying to figure out how can I make enough money to provide for my family. He is on a police ride-along, and he sees a drug bust. And one of his former high school students, chemistry students, is arrested. He then discovers or figures out that he could make an awful lot of money by turning an old RV into a mobile meth lab. And so he goes up to this former student and he says, "You've got the connections, and I know the chemistry." And he makes one poor decision after another, after another, after another. But at the end of the series, Walter White is hated by his wife, despised by his son, is dying, and everybody is left. Is there a hope for Walter White? Is there a hope for Judah? Is there a hope for us? How do we make our way back? How do we turn the tide as it is? How do we make things better? Now, spoiler alert here. In the same way that God is going to use Pitt and Egypt in order to turn Joseph's life around so that it's no longer just his dream, it becomes a God dream. We're going to discover, or I will propose to you, is that God is going to use this episode with Tamar to turn Judah's life around. so that he becomes a hero for the Hebrews. So what happens? Well, the story takes a tragic turn for Judah, just like it does for older wife. He marries a woman who's the daughter of Shua. She gives him 3 boys, Onan, and Shelah. What we read is that was killed by God, that he was wicked. Now, when we read this, we immediately have red flags go up, and it disturbs us to think that God would kill somebody. And so there are all kinds of biblical scholars who say, well, that's just the Bible's way of saying that he had a heart attack or a stroke or some sort of a sudden death. I don't buy into that. I take the scriptures for meaning what they say, and I suspect that there was something about that he was so wicked, that he was so evil, that he does not fit in with God's plan for the tribe of Judah. So God got rid of him. He kills him because he is wicked. He's evil. And so now the next part of the story becomes disturbing to us, because Judah goes to his next son, Onan, and he says to him that you need to sleep with your brother's wife, Tamar, and to raise up an heir for him. And we read this and we think, this is despicable. This is disgusting. What in the world is going on? And what's being described is Levirate marriage vows. In the ancient world, these were common. In fact, the Hebrews will take Levirate marriage vows and they will make them a requirement. And so it ends up being put in the book of Deuteronomy. The reason for this is that tribal purity, family, clans are paramount. They were concerned about making sure that the family line continued and that you had an heir so that family inheritance, family traditions, family worship is passed down. And so that's what Onan is supposed to do. He is supposed to sleep with Tamar. He is to have a child. And this child then is considered to be Er's child so that the inheritance continues and the family traditions continue. Well, Onan doesn't do it. He sleeps with Tamar repeatedly, is what the Hebrew is telling us. And yet he takes deliberate steps to make sure that Tamar does not become pregnant. Because he knows that if she becomes pregnant and has a child, then that child goes to and that's where the family inheritance is going to go. And so because of his greed and because of his selfishness, he doesn't allow Tamar to get pregnant because he knows that then will die childless and he will get share of the inheritance. Well, this ticks off God. And so he kills Onan. Now, the ancient Hebrews, when they read this story, you know what they're doing when they hear about Onan? They're thinking, what a dishonorable man. He's dishonoring his family, he's dishonoring his tribe, he's dishonoring his clan, he's just not doing what he's supposed to do. And when they hear that God kills him, you know what they're saying? Amen. You go, God. He deserves to die because he is such a dishonorable and a despicable man. And we're reading this, and we have just the opposite reaction, don't we? We think, how despicable, how disgusting that he's sleeping with his sister-in-law. And yet, we completely misunderstand the story. So this becomes our touch point. Our culture today treats sex the same way that Onan did. Onan used Tamar for his own pleasure, repeatedly. The point of his sleeping with Tamar is it's only supposed to have taken place once or twice in order for her to be pregnant. He's just using her and has no intention of being honorable and having her have a child so that his brother line continues on. He wanted sex without responsibility, without commitment, without consequences. In our society today, we do the same thing, don't we? We want sex without the commitment, without the responsibility, without the consequences. What's happening in our culture, in our world, in our society today? We have broken hearts, broken people, broken relationships. We have empty hearts, empty relationships, pain, suffering. You and Onan. You know Onan. How do we change that? story now takes a twist. Judah doesn't know why and Onan died. He just knows who the common denominator is. Tamar. So he assumes that she's responsible somehow for their death. And so the last thing he wants to do now is to give her to his youngest son, Shelah. And so he lies. Now, have you ever heard the phrase, the end justifies the means? I'm going to talk about that. But his thinking is the end is I need to preserve Shelah. The means is to lie to Tamar and to tell her that I'm going to give her to him when I have no intentions of doing so. And so then what he does is he sends her to live with her parents. This is not done in ancient cultures, in an ancient Hebrew culture. When you get married, you marry into the husband's clan, the husband's tribe. Judah is responsible for Tamar. He shirks his responsibility and he sends her away. Because she is pledged to Shelah, she can't remarry. She cannot defend herself. She can't provide for herself. He literally leaves her extremely vulnerable. Judah is being despicable and dishonorable at this particular point in the story. Now the story changes. And we start to read the story no longer from Judah's perspective, but from Tamar's perspective. Tamar comes to the conclusion that Judah is never going to honor the Levirate marriage vow. Shelah evidently reaches an age of sexual maturity to where he could give her to him, and he doesn't do so. And so she realizes that she's just out at this particular point. Well, the background of the story is we find that Judah's wife dies. And after the appropriate time of mourning, this is the only good thing that he does mourn for this Canaanite wife that he has, his daughter Shua, is that he's going to go to a sheep shearing party. He's going to shear his sheep, and he goes to a place by the name of Timnah, which is probably real close to where he was keeping his sheep pastures. Now, sheep shearing is not just the work of shearing the sheep, it's a party. Now, you don't do much sheep shearing around here. I haven't seen any flocks of sheep around here. But I am familiar with branding parties out in western Nebraska. And let me tell you that the barley pop flows a whole lot more free than does the sweet tea. That's what would happen at a sheep shearing. Is there would be this festival, there'd be lots of partying, there'd be lots of drinking, and oftentimes it was also linked with a religious festival. The religious festival may have temple prostitutes. This is the background of the story. So Judah's with his best friend, Hira, the Canaanite, who has thoroughly inundated Judah with Canaanite culture. And so Judah's going to this sheep shearing, and Tamar knows that Judah is lonely, that he is wanting to do something. I don't know how to tactfully say that. And so she disguises herself and sits beside the road. Now, we have a tendency when we read this, we think that Tamar was being seductive, that she was somehow doing something immoral to attract Judah to herself. The scriptures make no such claim. They simply say that she disguised herself by putting on a veil. And it was Judah who makes the assumptions and not Tamar about anything. And so what we do is we just get to see continued evidence of Judah's downward trajectory. He has become totally Canaanized. He doesn't see anything wrong with using temple prostitutes. He doesn't see that as being anything that is immoral. He doesn't recognize his daughter-in-law Tamar anymore. I mean, come on. How disguised are you if you wear a veil over your eyes? It's kind of like Superman. How does Superman disguise himself just because Clark Kent wears glasses? I mean, really. he should have recognized who she was. He should have realized that temple prostitutes are wrong. That's not what God would have him to do. And he gets right to the point as to what it is that he wants. He just assumes that she's a prostitute. She's not. She never intended to be a prostitute. It's all from Judah who's making these assumptions. And so he says, what do I have to pay you in order to sleep with you? And she doesn't say anything. He says, I'll give you a sheep. I'll give you a lamb from my flock. He doesn't have a lamb or a flock with him. You know, they don't fit your billfold. They don't carry very well. And so he says, I'll give you one tomorrow. And she says, fine, but I need a pledge from you. And so she says, I want your seal, your cord, and your staff. Now, Tamar is in complete control of this situation. She knows exactly what she's doing. Now, a seal, by the way, is not an animal that goes arf, arf, arf. A seal is a clay cylinder or a ring. And what you do is you'll roll this over wax and it leaves an impression, a stamp. Or you'll take your ring and you'll roll your ring over it and it makes a stamp. And this is how you signify that a document or something important is from you. And they'll usually drill a hole through them so that you can take a lanyard or a cord and can put it through there and wear it around your neck. And so this is what she asked for. She says, I want your seal, your credit card, is what she's saying. I want the lanyard that you're carrying it on, and I want your staff. A staff signified who you were. It's your driver's license, your ID card. Now, how stupid is Judah that he gives up his credit card and his driver's license? And yet he readily does so. Well, now the story actually becomes humorous. And the next day, Judah tries to pay his debt. And so he sends his friend Hira with the lamb. And of course they can't find Tamar because Tamar's not a prostitute. She went back to her parents' house and put back on her widow clothes. And not little clothes, widow clothes, okay. I didn't slur there. And so she's not a prostitute. And so they go looking for this temple prostitute, and they say, we're looking for the temple prostitute so that Judah can pay his vow. And everybody goes, there's no temple prostitute here. So it was all from Judah thinking that she was a prostitute. And so the Hebrews, when they're hearing this story, they're laughing. Because here Judah is so concerned about paying a debt, and he doesn't realize that the debt that he is paying is the Levirate marriage vow by having slept with Tamar. And so the readers here are laughing, thinking, Judah, what a fool you are. You're concerned about paying a lamb for services rendered, not realizing that you inadvertently had paid a vow that you had no intention of ever paying of this Levirate marriage. And then there's a play on the word as to how Judah refers to Tamar. When he's looking for this prostitute, he uses the word temple prostitute, which in Canaanite culture, there's nothing morally wrong with that. It puts Judah in the best light. I'm trying to pay my vow to this temple prostitute. You know, look what an honorable good guy I am. Later, when he finds out that Tamar is pregnant, and it's the same person, by the way, he doesn't refer to her in an honorable way. He says a harlot, a whore. She's a terrible person. And so you have this play off of these particular words that are going on. There's a subtle humor that we don't get. Tamar didn't want a lamb. She wanted the seal, the cord, and the staff. Well, now the story takes another twist. We find out that Tamar is pregnant. Judah, when he finds out about this 3 months later, he goes nuts. He goes ballistic. Because now his honor, he thinks, has been violated. His honor was violated when he didn't fulfill the vow with Tamar to begin with. So now he's all bent out of shape because he thinks that Tamar has dishonored the family by playing the whore and getting pregnant. He had sent Tamar away so that he was no longer responsible for her, but now he wants to assume responsibility again for her so that he can burn her to death for having been unfaithful to his clan, to the Judah family. And so he demands that they bring her out, and he's going to burn her to death, and he refers to her in this derogatory term, saying that she was a harlot, that she was a terrible person. Well, Tamar comes out. She's still in control. And she brings out the staff, the driver's license, the seal of the court, the credit card, and he's presented to Judah, and she says, do you recognize these? How embarrassing. How embarrassing for Judah. Now, Judah could have denied all of this, right? Being in a patriarchal society, he could have said she stole them. But he doesn't. Instead, he says, Tamar is more righteous than I. Seeing how the story works now, that it's not a story of immorality, not a story of incest. It's a story of incredible bravery and honor. The end of the story is that Judah completely confesses, and he exonerates Tamar. That's that whole thing. Tamar is more righteous. She's innocent. She is more righteous. She is more in line with God than I am. She is the one who's been demonstrating honor. I am the one who has been dishonorable. She fulfilled the Levirate vow. I was doing everything in my power not to fulfill the Levirate vow. So he confesses up. Humbling thing to do. But this is what brings the change about in Judah. Before, Judah had ran from his family, he had ran from his country, he had ran from his culture. Because he was afraid of God, he was guilty. He had betrayed his brother, lied to his father. Now, this is what's going to enable Judah to go back to his family, back to his country, and to lead his people. Tamar is doubly blessed. He has his child, except it's not a child. She has twins. He has Perez and Zerah. And here's the connection that happens here. Is that Tamar ends up sleeping with Judah. He has twins, Perez and Perez. Perez is eventually going to have a son by the name of Solomon. Solomon's eventually going to have sons. These are several generations down, by the name of Boaz. Boaz is going to marry another Moabite girl by the name of Ruth, also fulfilling the Levirate vow. Ruth and Boaz are going to have a child by the name of Obed. He's going to have a child by the name of Jesse. He's going to have a child by the name of David. David eventually is going to have a son by the name of Solomon. Through the line of Solomon, we're eventually going to get the Messiah, Jesus. The line came to Tamar because she was more righteous. What are the implications? Do the ends justify the means? If I drink a Diet Coke along with my super-sized fries, does the Diet Coke neutralize calories of the super fries? Yes. At least we hope so, right? This question is a much more important question. Do the ends justify the means? Is it all right for Walter White to manufacture drugs? Because what he hopes will happen is he'll make money in order to provide for his family? Is it all right for Tamar to allow Judah to think that she's a prostitute in order to get him to fulfill the Levirate marriage vow? Let's bring it up even up to date now. Is it all right for a government, the United States government, torture people in order to try to find out about terrorist threats? Is it all right for the police to lie to somebody who they're interrogating in order to try to trick them into confessing to a crime? Make it even more personal. Is it all right for parents to invade the privacy of their children, to read their internet connections, emails, text messages, see what their kids are up to? Is it all right for a spouse to spy on their husband or their wife, hoping to see they're doing something that would cause them harm? These issues, they're not theoretical. Does the end justify the means? In our culture today, it simply means excusing immoral or sinful behavior. And we rationalize it by saying that I'm actually doing a better good. And most of the time, it's not. It's our own selfishness. We spy on our kids, not because we're really concerned about our kids, but we're concerned about our kids doing something that embarrasses us. And so I'd say most of the time, no. The ends do not justify the means. Sin is still sin. It's still wrong. But the Judah Tamar story is not really about the ends justifying the means. It's actually a story of telling us that God is in control. And that God is working in Judah's life. And he uses Tamar in Judah's own downward trajectory to bring him to a place where he confesses that he is not doing what he needs to be doing. So no, I do not think the ends justify. Second, I wish we'd had a lot more young ladies in our congregation here today. Tamar is a hero. This is a story of incredible bravery and faithfulness. She's in a patriarchal society where she has no power, and yet she is able to take control enough of the situation, is righteous enough, that she brings about the fulfillment of God's promise. What makes this story interesting to me is that Judah is a Jew. That's where the name Jews come from. But he is acting more Canaanite than Tamar. Tamar is a Canaanite, and yet she acts more Jewish than Tamar, because she's the one who is fulfilling the promises of God. The implication for us is, are we Christian because of a change of heart, or are we Christian culturally? Do we think that because I go to church in Benton, or because I grew up in the United States, or because I can say the Lord's Prayer, that makes me Christian? That makes you Judah. A Christian is somebody who has their heart changed, is in a right relationship with God. Your background might be that you came from someplace else, but because you've had a genuine religious relationship experience with Jesus, inviting him into your heart, that's what makes you a Christian. And that's what the story of Judah and Tamar is telling us. That's why Judah says, she's more righteous than I am. She's more Jewish than I am. She's more Christian than I am. What's our story? Are we really Christian because of our faith? Or do we just call ourselves Christian because of our culture, the way we were raised? Then the last implication that I want to briefly look at is that of the role of confession. I don't think we realize how humiliating and humbling and embarrassing this would have been for Judah. But he doesn't. He confesses totally and completely. I am the dishonorable one. Tamar is the one who is righteous and just. He repents. And it is a result of his confession, of his repentance, that Judah is changed. And it is no accident. Jesus is born through the line of Judah and Tamar. So our last questions. Have you dishonored yourself? Have you not fulfilled your promises? Not fulfilled your vows? Excused it by saying the end justified. We failed to keep our promises, our obligation. Remember the start of the story? Judah went down from his brothers. After his encounter with Tamar, he was able to come up with his family. What about you? Are you coming up? Or are you going down? You want to come up? You can start today. Communion is an excellent invitation as to what it takes to come up as opposed to going down. Jesus' disciples were in confusion and chaos, frightened. He told them he was going to die. And he took the bread and he broke it and said that this is my body which is given for you. Take and eat in remembrance of me. And likewise, after the supper, he took the cup. He said, this is the cup of my blood that was shed for you. See, sin is costly. He says, this is my blood which is shed for you, for the forgiveness of your sins. Take and drink in remembrance of me. You want to stop going down and instead want to come up. We would invite you to come, receive the body of Christ that was given for you, receive the blood that was shed for you. You might be forgiven and receive life. Our communion is open to all. You don't have to be a member of this congregation. You don't have to be a member of this denomination. You just have to desire to be somebody who wants to come up and continue to live as one who is righteous and honorable. Let us come.